She was never invited back. No press release. No dramatic send dash off. No public argument caught by cameras. Just silence. One night, she was laughing under the bright lights of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, sitting beside the most powerful man in late-night television. And the next, she was gone. In Hollywood, silence can be louder than scandal, because when you crossed Johnny Carson, you didn't just lose a booking. You lost the kingdom, and she wasn't the only one. Behind the easy grin, the perfectly timed punchlines, and that famous wave that could change a life in seconds, there was another side to the king of late night. A side that remembered, a side that held grudges, a side that never forgot betrayal. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain, because the real story didn't happen in front of the camera. It happened after the applause stopped, the era when one man controlled night. To understand what happened, you have to understand the power. Today, fame is scattered. There are dozens of platforms, thousands of podcasts, millions of creators, but in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there were only a few networks. And when the clock struck 11:30 p.m., America belonged to Johnny Carson. Every night, millions of viewers tuned in. Families stayed up just a little longer. Comedians gathered around television sets in small apartments. Actors rehearsed stories in their heads, praying they wouldn't bomb. Because 5 minutes on Carson's stage could mean everything. If you were a stand-up comedian, that appearance wasn't just exposure. It was validation. It meant you had arrived. When Carson laughed, genuinely laughed, the country laughed with him. When he invited you to sit down beside him after your set, that was the moment. That was the Carson wave. And that wave built careers. Just ask David Letterman. Just ask Jerry Seinfeld. They've both spoken about what it meant when Carson approved of them. It wasn't just about airtime. It was about endorsement. Carson was the gatekeeper. He didn't just host a show. He defined late-night television. The monologue, the desk, the sidekick, the celebrity couch, the musical guest. Even today, hosts like Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel follow the structure Carson perfected decades ago. But power like that changes a man, and it changes the people around him. Because when one man controls the spotlight, everyone else learns to stay in line. The unwritten rules of Carson's kingdom. There was no handbook, no posted rules backstage, but everyone knew. You didn't interrupt Johnny. You didn't steal the spotlight. You didn't drag a joke too long. You didn't surprise him. And above all, you didn't betray him. Because if you did, you wouldn't be publicly humiliated. You wouldn't be called out. You wouldn't be exposed. You would simply stop being invited. And in that era, that quiet removal could end a career. The scariest part? You often didn't know what you had done wrong. The shift could be subtle. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A joke that landed, but didn't get his laugh. A moment where you talked just a little too long. Carson hated losing control. The show had rhythm, precision, timing. It was his stage. And if you disrupted that rhythm, even unintentionally, you might never return. The woman he once called his star. There was one person who seemed immune to all of this. A woman who wasn't just a guest. She was family. Her name was Joan Rivers. When she first stepped onto Carson's stage in 1960s, she was sharp, fearless, and unapologetically bold in an industry dominated by men. She wasn't polished. She wasn't delicate. She was electric. Carson saw it immediately. After one of her early performances, he turned to the audience and said, "You're going to be hearing a lot about this girl." And America did. He brought her back, repeatedly. He made her a regular. He elevated her from struggling club comic to national star. Eventually, he named her his permanent guest host whenever he took nights off. For a woman in comedy, at that time, it was groundbreaking. She wasn't just appearing. She was inheriting. To viewers, she looked like the natural successor. But behind the laughter, something was brewing. Because power creates ambition. And ambition can look like betrayal to the wrong person. The offer that changed everything. In the mid-1980s, a young, hungry network called Fox Broadcasting Company wanted to compete. They wanted their own late-night show. And they wanted a headline. So they made Joan Rivers an offer. Her own program. She would become the first woman to host a major network late-night talk show. It was historic. It was risky. It was dangerous. And it was the opportunity of a lifetime. There was just one problem. Johnny Carson didn't hear about it from her. He heard it from executives, from industry chatter, from people whispering behind closed doors. To Joan, it was business. To Carson, it was betrayal, the phone call that ended it. When Joan called Johnny to explain, he hung up. When she wrote him letters, he didn't respond. When she tried to reconcile, there was silence. And just like that, she was gone. No more invitations. No more appearances. No tributes. No acknowledgement. For decades, she was erased from The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Clips were rarely shown. Her name wasn't mentioned. The mentor became the Exile's gatekeeper. Years later, Joan admitted she never stopped hoping for forgiveness. She called him the most important person in her career. She said she cried when he died, not because television lost a legend, but because she lost the chance to fix what had broken. But Carson never publicly reconciled. The silence lasted until the end. The pattern behind the curtain. Joan wasn't the only one. Carson's reactions weren't explosive. They were controlled. Comedian Howie Mandel once brought an unapproved prop onto the stage, a giant stuffed animal meant to be playful. It disrupted the flow. Carson hated surprises. Mandel wasn't scolded on air. He just wasn't invited back. Then there was Wayne Newton, a Las Vegas icon. At one point, Newton and Carson were friendly. But when Newton outbid Carson in a business deal involving a Vegas property, the tone changed. Carson began slipping jokes into his monologue. They weren't light teasing. They were pointed. The audience laughed. Newton didn't. Eventually, Newton confronted him backstage. The joke stopped. The invitations did too. Because once Carson cooled on you, he stayed cold. The man behind the smile. On television, Carson looked effortless, cool, detached, unbothered. But off camera, he was intensely private, guarded, sensitive to loyalty. He disliked confrontation. Instead of yelling, he withdrew. Instead of arguing, he erased. It was cleaner that way, more controlled. Friends described him as someone who could charm a room, but rarely let anyone close. Even his personal life reflected that distance. For marriages, public divorces, private struggles, he joked about his failed marriages on air, but behind the punchlines were real fractures. When his son Rick died in a tragic accident in 1991, viewers saw a different Johnny. Fragile, human. The man who controlled the night suddenly looked vulnerable. And maybe that vulnerability explains something, because sometimes the more control someone needs on stage, the more fragile they feel off of it. Retirement and the final curtain. When Carson retired in 1992, he didn't linger in the spotlight. No comeback tour. No weekly interviews. No endless guest appearances. He disappeared into Malibu. It was almost poetic. The man who controlled late night for 30 years chose silence as his final act. He passed away in 2005 from complications related to emphysema. Tributes poured in. Comedians credited him for their careers. Hosts honored his influence. But the stories of those who never returned to his stage, those remained quieter. So, why was she never allowed back? The answer isn't explosive. It isn't dramatic. It isn't scandalous. It's simple. She crossed an invisible line. In Johnny Carson's world, loyalty mattered. Control mattered. Respect mattered. And when he felt one of those had been violated, the door closed. Not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. The legacy of power. Johnny Carson shaped television forever. Every late night host today works in a house he built. But his reign also reminds us of something else. Power without transparency creates fear. Fear creates silence. And silence can erase history. She wasn't banned because she failed. She wasn't banned because the audience rejected her. She was banned because she moved forward without the king's blessing. And in Carson's kingdom, that was unforgivable. Was Johnny Carson protecting his empire? Or was he punishing independence? That debate continues, but one thing is certain. Behind the laughter, behind the monologues, behind the effortless charm, there was a man who ruled the night, and when he turned cold, Hollywood felt it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into late-night history and the untold stories behind the curtain, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because sometimes the real drama doesn't happen on stage. It happens after the applause fades.